Hey, what's up everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you a coaching call excerpt that I had with a client who was asking me questions about social anxiety, the shame that comes from being socially anxious, as well as approach anxiety and how to overcome years of socially anxious behaviors that have turned into habits. If you are somebody who struggles with social anxiety or approach anxiety, and you want to learn how to show up in your life in a way that is no longer dominated and controlled by anxiety, then this video is for you. Without further ado, let's get into it. I'm curious, how are you relating to the anxiety that you feel at the moment? Like, when you notice you're struggling with this anxiety, do you see this as like personal failure, like a defect that causes you to feel shame? Do you see this as a sign that you're learning a new skill, that you're stepping into an area of discomfort that will soon become an area of comfort? How do you relate to this experience of anxiety? Yeah, I definitely understand that sentiment. And this is one of the things where personally I'm very passionate about this idea because I've seen it in myself as part of my own journey. I've always been a very anxiously strung person. I grew up with a lot of toxic shame, a lot of just like difficulty socializing. I was bullied a lot when I was a kid. I got constantly rejected, just like over and over and over and over again by girls that I was interested in. My anxiety about feeling safe in social situations, ironically and paradoxically, caused things to blow up in a very painful way. Those psychological self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Like, I'm unsure, I don't feel safe, I feel anxious, I feel not good enough. And those very behaviors caused the outcome that I was afraid of happening to happen. That lack of authenticity, the lack of intimacy, the people-pleasing behaviors, all of that stems from the anxiety, kills relationships. And so it's this horrible cycle that we find ourselves in where, there's a saying in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in the Bible, right? It's called the Matthew principle. To those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken from them. That's a quote out of theory, like Christ's mouth. He uttered those words allegedly in the, part of the takeaway for that is that that's a recognition of a fundamental pattern of reality. You look in the rainforest and you see that the tallest trees get 80% of the sunlight, and the 20% of the tallest trees get 80% of the sunlight, right? It's that same kind of principle at work. And we fall into that psychologically in situations like this. But the problem really is where I see where change happens and where the problem lies, where we get stuck, is in our false belief that this is permanent. There is absolutely no science anywhere whatsoever to evidentially ground the claim that a habit is permanent. There's none. So there's so many angles to attack this, at least from a rational basis, to accept, even though you may not feel it at the moment, the proposition that there is actually nothing in life but change. You have no option but to change, actually. It's just the belief that we carry around of like, okay, so I've developed a habit of being this way, and I feel the shame now, but the shame is this, it's the same kind of cycle, right? The shame locks us into these patterns of self-sabotage. So the mindset, especially as you're early on, that I would encourage you to kind of adopt here is that there is nothing you can't learn. And ultimately, that's all this is. You are just at a particular place in a process of skill development. If you continue to put yourself in uncomfortable situations and discover that you are safe, you have no option but for your brain to start to reinterpret those situations as safe. There is just no other thing that your brain will do. That's how your brain works, right? If you go out, with the swimming thing, for example, if you suddenly find you can swim, there's no way you will not start to feel safe and confident in the water. It's like, there's no room for disbelief anymore because I have a massive pile of evidence that suggests that this is a safe environment and will continue to be a safe environment for me to occupy. And it's the same with social skills. So if you spent your, I mean, there's a couple things to piece together here. One is like, your upbringing and all of that obviously impacted you. The other thing is, to remind yourself that what you're experiencing is not just normal, it is like a defining characteristic of almost everybody who lives in the United States today. Over the last 15 to 20 years, we have become among the most isolated, highest screen time, lonely people on the planet. You don't have the option that somebody had 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, or just 20 years ago. Like if I tell you to go outside, like you don't get to go outside and just like see people. Everybody's inside on their screens, or they're dating through dating apps, or it's like there's a shift in that. But part of what I want to remind you is that the environment that your parents may have had, where the ability to practice socializing on a regular basis, like that was not even an option for them to say no to, right? It was a fact of life that in order for them to survive, they had to have regular social encounters and that kind of thing, right? So us modern people, right, brains don't break, they rust. If we don't go out and we don't utilize and flex and work these parts of our brains and personalities, they just become rusty. Like the pathways in our brain that do all these things, like personality expression and feeling comfortable and confident just relating and talking to people, that kind of stuff, it just rusts. And not to bounce around and mix up too many analogies here, but in the same way as like if you sit in a chair for forever and you never walk or run or use your legs just atrophy. And so part of what you're experiencing right now perhaps is a combination of, some things from your past, maybe your family of origin, but then also just atrophy. But the same way that if you take somebody who's just been stationary for too long and you get them in the gym and there's a pain period and they put in the reps and then they're sore and then it hurts and they injure themselves once or twice, they recover, they get back on track, they improve their strength, and then 6 months later they're like running sprints. The exact same process applies to everything, including your process of learning social skills. So that's like area number one, is that I want to remind you of the context that you're in, that absolutely nothing that you're struggling with is unique to you. This is a defining struggle for the modern man of how to overcome the isolation that technology and social progress, if we want to call that progress, has forced the modern person to have to contend with. You have to carry and intentionally accept a larger amount of effort is going to be required of you to achieve what somebody would have had to put almost no effort into achieving about 50 years ago, socially. And now, instead of being resentful about that or something like that, the goal is to be like, I can't change that, so my only option is to accept it. Do I want to suffer the pain of being lonely and miserable, or do I want to suffer the pain of putting in the work and cultivating the social life that is still possible? It's like that's the fork in the road that all of us are standing at. And I think by being in this program, you've obviously made a significant investment in saying, I'm going to put in the work to choose the latter. But to bring things back home to like the mindset thing, and what I would encourage you to kind of think of, and maybe a question for you is, why don't children ever give up on learning how to walk? You ever notice, you ever seen like a 1.5-year-old just like fall down and then just decide to like never get back up? Scientists have actually, like behavioral psychology, developmental psychologists have actually done a lot of research into this because it's interesting. When you take a very young person, a child 1.5, 2 years old, with speaking or walking or running, they don't give up ever. They just don't. The interesting thing, right, is that you can hopefully start to see the parallels here, that they experience all of the same things, in fact, more intensely than we as adults experience when we try to learn new skills. For them, the process of walking, it's almost entirely failure the entire time. And it hurts every time. Like the only outcome from failure is pain. And they fail over and 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 over again as they fall, right? And they have this like untamable willingness to endure that process, and with absolutely no shame, self-judgment, or criticism at all. Partly because fortunately they haven't developed enough brain to be able to do that. But part of what the developmental psychologists found is that the mind of a child in that space is occupying something that they call intent to mastery. So the child is relating to that process of like learning how to walk simply as if it's a skill that will be learned and developed. And the process of learning and development just looks like this. And there's no questioning that. There's no like attachment of self-worth to it. There's no self-criticism. There's no like, oh no, I fell again. Am I ever going to learn how to walk? Like children don't think like that. The kid just falls down and then he stands up and keeps walking. And there's this implicit trust the child has in himself, even though he can't consciously think of this, that the nature of his brain is just to learn. As he gives himself exposure and repetition, it takes focus, consistency, and momentum. If he focuses on learning how to walk, stays consistent with it, and then continues to do that over time, there's no option but to get better and to learn. That's just the nature of brains. They just learn and improve. It's just like what they do. And so I want to kind of offer that to you as a perspective to take on for yourself, that in a way, there's absolutely nothing that has fundamentally changed about who you are and how your brain works from when you were born to where you are now. The capacity of your brain to learn is more or less the same. Although some of the habits you've developed, they will change more slowly, obviously, than a child who doesn't have habits to break. So your process may take a little bit longer. However, there is fundamentally no difference here. If you continue to go out, right, and if I kind of blend this analogy, bring in another one here with the children, because I think it's really useful. If you take a 2-year-old to the park, or like a 1.5-year-old to the park for the first time, they've never left mom pretty much up until that point, except for maybe to be with dad or whatever, but they've always been within about a 10 or 15 foot radius of mom up until that point in their life. So they have a lot of fear and trepidation about wandering away from mom in particular. So you take them to the park and it's like, well, there's other kids playing there. Like, what do you notice that the kid does? Well, all of a sudden, again, because they don't have all they can do is just enact their base biological wiring. They go into explorer mode. Like, the world is so interesting. Oh, there's something cool over there. Oh, there's other little kids over there. I want to go over there, but I'm scared. And so what do? They test. They go 5 feet from mom, right? Into their comfort zone just a little bit. And then they run back to mom. They re-secure and re-ground for safety. And they realize, oh, going away 5 feet is safe. And then what do? They go away like 10 feet. And then it's the same process over and over and over and over again. They test the limits, then they go back to mom. Then they test a little bit farther, and then they go back to mom. And then they go, maybe the mom takes them over and introduces them to a kid and like kind of allows them to experience like, okay, mom's here, it's safe for me to play with another human being. And then begins the process of kind of like baseline socialization. But the child's process of learning that this is a safe thing to do is I step slightly outside of my comfort zone and then I return to safety. I go slightly outside my comfort zone again, even a little bit farther, and then I return to that point of safety. And so using this analogy again of like in this process of learning, all of us really want to adopt this kind of childlike mind. The process for you and for it to be very successful will look very similar. And that's why you see that laid out in the desensitization plan is you go out, you do something like making eye contact. It's just a little outside your comfort zone. And then you go home and then you're like, whoa, I'm still alive. Everything was fine. And then you go a little bit farther, right? And now it's like, well, I'm pushing myself to compliment people. Well, now this is definitely past your comfort zone. And so you're kind of playing around out there at the moment, exploring and discovering like, okay, if I go up to grandma and I say, I love your dress today. You look fantastic. You're glowing, right? And then grandma's like, oh my gosh. And then you make her day and you get this like, pooh, like big reward in return. And you see that smile on her face. All of a sudden it's like, oh, this was safe the entire time. But here's where it gets nuanced, is that you're also going, living in the adult world, you're not always going to get positive feedback, and part of what you'll learn is that the more comfortable and confident you become, the better your feedback gets. But like the child who has to fall in order to learn how to walk, you have to, I use that word very specifically, you have to accumulate negative social feedback in order to learn how to show up in a different way socially. The way that like skill development and this kind of stuff happens over time is like, you want to think about it like the most sustainable and the fastest path to transformation kind of looks like this upward S curve. Sustainable transformation and real transformation never looks exponential, and it also never looks linear. It's always this kind of like helical upward pattern. And so it's normal to find that like, okay, I went out, I had a good experience, and then I'm having a bad experience now. And the experience of getting a lot better at dating, it's going to take you through this multiple times. Like part of what you'll experience is you progress through the desensitization phase, is that you go out and all of a sudden like you'll have a really good night. Well, you'll be like, oh my gosh, like it feels like I had this kind of breakthrough. And then the next weekend you'll go out and it will just be like everything was awful. I felt super anxious. I got overwhelmed by the environment. I got like rejected and blown off by most of the girls that I opened and approached. I got told, fuck you, go away. Like that kind of stuff happens. And the interesting thing though is that as you continue to persist, your brain is beginning to learn some really important things. Namely, like one of the things that happens when you get a lot of negative social feedback is we get a very intense desire to fix it. We start to care a lot about the feedback that we're getting from other people. And part of what you notice is that the more that you go out with this anxious, protective energy that says, I need to avoid rejection and receive positive social feedback, you're bringing an energy into all of your interactions that is one of taking and protection. And it's like, if I could turn you into like, take away your physical form and like represent you in this fictional animated universe as the energy that you're entering that interaction with, the question is, are you like sunshine, or are you like a wall of armor with a black hole on the inside, or like a wounded heart on the inside that it's trying to protect? If you imagine like you were out at the street and you kind of saw it through this lens, it's like you get approached by like rusty bucket of armor that is like super defensive and cold, or you get approached by like angel sunshine energy. It's like, which one would you be open and receptive to? And understanding that when you go up to every social interaction, the people's subconscious mind, especially women, they're perceiving you energetically far more than they're perceiving you physically. But returning to the fact that that's totally normal, right? Like we can enter and exit these different modes of being self-protective or of being self-expressive, of taking validation versus giving value. And the more that part of what you'll find again in this process is that the more you go out and you maintain this like self-protective energy and you keep getting the negative feedback over and over and over and over again, oftentimes what will happen if you persist is that you will start to learn that you just keep going and you just keep surviving. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't have to be liked to be okay. And then on top of that, sometimes what you'll find is that something will kind of like give up and break inside of you, where you just stop giving a fuck. that somebody gave you negative social feedback. And ironically, what happens is that when you hit that mode where you kind of just stop caring, everything starts to go well because you're no longer approaching with like, rusty bucket of armor energy. You're all of a sudden you're like carefree. And then you're like, whoa, that's a much different energy. And you're a little bit more calm and you're a little bit more relaxed. You're a little bit more on your feet because you're not caring as much about how you're being perceived. But this process, like I said, it's something that takes time. And so a general rule of thumb is like, if you're going out 4 days a week for at least 2 hours, every 3 months, you can expect that the best possible day that you could have today will be your average day in 3 months. That's like an incredible, but also, again, if you're going out like four days a week for about 2 hours, that's like average results, roughly. So to bookend that, I also just want to condense that into a single principle, which is trust the process. When you notice that you're having a lot of these negative thoughts, for you, there'll probably be a process of finding something that resonates as true for you. Like, if it was possible for somebody else who was worse off than me to learn this, there's no reason I can't. So do I know anybody who's worse off than me? I can actually present you with several. I don't know enough about your background really to say that right now, but I know some people who are like absolute hard cases. Like, you would never have guessed. Like Austin had a student who on a program I helped assistant coach, who was on the autism spectrum. When he went up to approach a girl, he opened with, "I was on my way to what I call the obelisk of death," referring to a monument on a college. Like, that was a monument on a college campus. That was the state of his mind when he was opening, like his level of social skills. About 2.5 years later, he is engaged. Like, I could go and rattle off like example after example after example after example of people who committed to the process, trusted that you are the falling child learning to walk, that in the same way that like you don't have to believe that your insulin is going to work if you have diabetes, you just have to put the shot in your stomach and the insulin works. If you go out and you take this action, it really doesn't matter what you think about yourself at the end of the day. Your limiting beliefs have no bearing or metric whatsoever on whether the action that you're taking is going to result in many of the changes that it will result in. Yeah, so I've experienced that plenty of times in my life, and even after taking a break from doing this for a while, like after I got out of a relationship about a year ago, and obviously I took a break as the breakup was rough and I needed time. I was ready to go out again. As soon as I started going out again, it was like, oh my gosh, like I feel a level of anxiety, and the fear-based excuse making machine in my brain is so strong. And then I'm like, man, like part of me knows, like part of me is like excited of like, I should go do it. And then it's like something in me pulls the emergency brake and it's like, so first thing to note, right, is that actually is your fight or flight system being activated. Like something inside of you or inside of me in those situations. Like I mentioned, I've been a very anxious person socially for a long time. I also, just a quick background thing, in 2017, I had an experience that left me diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I was having panic attacks for a long time, like really intense traumatic experience that left me very sensitive to anxiety. And so one of the things that has really helped me is that it's actually okay for me to feel anxious. Like sometimes it's easier to connect to that than other times, but it's actually just okay for me to feel anxious. Like I can go up anxious. I can take action anxious. I can kind of comfort that anxious part of me and be like, hey, I got you, dude. You're welcome here. You can stay. And when I'm no longer trying to fight to make myself feel different than I do, all of a sudden I find that the bandwidth that I have available to actually take action improves. The other piece of this, though, to actually bring into frame is that you have to find ways to build emotional leverage on yourself. There's a couple ways that you'll find emotional leverage. So one of them, as I kind of mentioned before, you'll go out and if you commit, like I'm just going to keep going out no matter what. If you just stick to that, what's likely to happen is that you will go out and you'll make excuses. And then you'll go home disappointed and upset at yourself. And then you'll reconnect with be like, no, I'm going to stick with this. And then you go out again and you do it again. And then you go home and you have the same experience. And then you do that probably, I mean, who knows? Like maybe, I know some people who had that experience, like Austin, for example, for 2 to 3 months of just going out and just suffering from their own like emergency brake. And the frustration of continually being stifled by your own emergency brake oftentimes will break into this insane moment of emotional leverage where you'd be like, there is no fucking way I am doing that again. I am not having this night again. And all of a sudden this emotional leverage appears, which enables you to take action despite feeling anxious. That is the worst way to do it. But that is what will happen eventually, I think, if you continue to take action. What I found to be very effective is getting a wing. Positive social pressure has a way of helping us overcome anxiety, just unlike anything else. So going out with somebody is really helpful. The second part of that is habit contracts, or like making a contract with somebody. So maybe you have a friend or somebody in the program or something like that, and you can literally say, I'm going out, I am committing, no matter what it takes, to 10 compliments to guys and 10 compliments to girls. If I do not do these 20 compliments, I have to pay somebody in this group or this accountability partner an amount of money that it would hurt you to lose. So something that I did in the past to help me like overcome approach anxiety, I had a wing that I would go out with a lot named Corbin, who's actually kind of excited. He's actually about to move across the country here to, me and him are going to be roommates together. Very excited about that. It was really cool having him as a wing. But we used to do this thing called a 2-minute drill, where we would go out in the beginning of the night and we would say, if I do not approach, and like I have to stay in an interaction continuously for 2 minutes straight. And if I am outside of an interaction or I do not like engage within 10 seconds, I have to pay you $200. And so the combination of the social pressure and the financial loss made it like I have the emotional leverage. I feel anxious and I'm like, every fiber of my being is like, I don't want to do it. I feel the emergency brake getting pulled. And then sometimes I needed Corbin to literally just kick me in the ass and be like, go, and overwhelm my anxious thinking mind with massive action. And what you'll find is that that's ultimately, now to kind of piece this together to an endpoint, the solution that you'll find is that the remedy for your anxiety, twofold. One is healing the emotional roots of the anxiety, the past trauma, family of origin wounds, that kind of thing. The other piece of it is simply action. Your anxious mind is overwhelmed by massive action. In the presence of like a 2-minute drill like that, there's no room to feel anxious. You have no mental bandwidth to do anything but approach and to say something. And what you'll find is that you will learn that principle. You will discover that the remedy for your anxiety has been and will only ever be action. There's no thinking your way through it. There's no like sitting there and negotiating with anxiety. There's no waiting for it to go away. The only path, the only one, is action. That's the only thing that will change how you feel. So go out. Eventually, right, this will be something that in time you'll get to experience. Having the emotional leverage will help. Do not put this expectation on yourself to do this right now. This is something where I would be like, in the next 3 months, this is something we want to see that you have an experience of. That would be a huge leap of progress, is that you went out and then you found yourself able to enter a state of massive action for like 30 seconds, and then a minute, and then 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, when I go out and I immediately, like, no excuses, no thinking, first person I see, boom, next person I see, hey, I like your shirt, boom, next people, I love you guys. And then it's just action, 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 words, 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 action, action, action. 2 minutes later, you feel like you took drugs. And you're like, I feel so good. There's so much value pouring out of who I am. Like I overwhelmed the thinking mind with massive action. And now I'm like, I have proof. I have proof that I have experience that it is possible for this armor and this emergency brake to deactivate. That there's a whole side of my personality that is available to me, and that a lot of what you're experiencing right now is just what it's like to be in protection mode. But your nervous system has other gears. It's just it's just a matter of getting your nervous system into a place where you can exit protection mode and enter self-expression and connection mode and giving mode. But that's a process, right? Like we talked about earlier, children, they don't walk instantly. You are at a particular place in a process of skill development. Returning to that frame really quick, as this stuff is unfolding for you, I would encourage you to relate to yourself like you might relate to like 10-year-old Mozart. Right? Do you think like 10-year-old Mozart was playing like unbelievably beautiful sonatas? Or was he probably like plucking a couple wrong keys every once in a while? Right? Or even younger, like 6-year-old, whenever he started playing instruments, right? You are like 6-year-old Mozart right now. You would never walk up to 6-year-old Mozart who couldn't play, whatever sonata and be like, you're terrible. Like you're stuck forever. You're going to be a bad pianist forever because you can't do this. Like nobody would ever say that to him, simply because you understand, like, he's 6. When he's 20, this process of failure is going to be refined into a piano virtuoso. So I encourage you to fail a lot. Keep practicing. Like, give yourself permission to be imperfect. Give yourself permission to approach anxiously. Give yourself permission to be rejected. Give yourself permission to experience the negative things, because that's actually the same thing as learning. I hope you guys got some value, some insights, some takeaways from what I had to say here. If you're somebody who's currently struggling with pornography, or struggling with social anxiety, shame, fear of rejection, or you're just not experiencing the kind of dating life that you want, or the kinds of connection that you want in your life, and you're ready to break free, and you're ready to change, you're ready to escape and break free from these patterns that are holding you back from the life that you want to live, then I want you to go into the description below and book a call with me. I would love to see if you're a good fit for my mentorship program, where you can receive the kind of coaching that you saw in this video today, one-on-one, where we can tackle your specific issues and your specific patterns. Now, if that sounds like you, again, go down into the description below, click on that link, and book a call with me. I hope you guys got a ton of value here. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.